All right. So this is a gentleman from Twitter um, who wanted to take up the mighty incest debate position. All right.
Oof.
So how did this even start? I'm not sure. I get like there's a million people that I'll fight in my mentions now, so I lose track of you guys sometimes. What happened?
Well, I noticed one of the things, one of the people I follow had retweeted "Still Gray,"
Mm-hmm.
and I noticed your photo and a screen cap of what you had said, and I was like, "Huh, okay."
What was the
I
screen
read
cap of what I had
the
said?
part here. I'll actually just pull it up so I can quote it properly because I don't want to. My memory is not the best, and I don't want to misquote you. Okay. Where are we? Okay. So you say, yeah, you can pull up a VOD where I say I think incest is good rather than merely talking about it as a concept.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And the second part where it was, or rather, do you want me to hop on and talk about incest? I'm 100% sure you wouldn't be able to mount an argument against
Oh,
it.
yeah, talking to the still gray guy. I don't
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it could because I consider that guy to be one of the dumbest fucking idiots I've ever seen on Twitter. So, yeah, I stand by that statement still.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Uh, whether that's him personally would not be able to do it, but I saw that and I was like, you know what? I will take the man on his challenge.
Okay.
Where, and honestly, I don't talk to Still Gray. I don't know him personally or just off the cuff from Twitter, so I don't really give a fuck about him.
Okay, cool.
So
Well, good luck. You're stepping up to the challenge. No one has been able to do this successfully yet, so, whew.
okay. So just so because I don't want to misrepresent you,
Mm-hmm.
strawman you, or anything, I want you to just you yourself say what your position is.
Sure. So for me personally, at this point, I'm pretty ambiguous on it. I guess I don't spend too much time dwelling on it. But for the sake of the argument, I guess the position is that incest should be seen as a morally neutral thing. That there you cannot assign like a moral evil or a moral wrong to the act of incest itself.
Okay.
And then that's usually people will come in guns blazing trying to do that, and then yeah, that's the default position.
Okay. Well, I might as well open up. So I'm personally atheist,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously that feel there you can attribute that. Well, as an atheist, I would feel that morality is ambiguous and it flows between culture to culture, but there is biologically innately certain things that are implemented into our social construct. Because yeah, there's the social construct as in what society tells you is okay, but there is you don't have to be told that some certain things are wrong to innately know that there is something wrong about it. There's that gut feeling that you get from it, like murder. A lot. There's not. You could even tell a serial killer knows murder is wrong because they hide it. They know there's something abstractly wrong about it. Whether they follow those social cues is different between person and person. Some people can, within their own person, morally object or agree with a position such as murder. So, like, let's say if
Yeah.
we're
So
talking about
sure.
capital
So I understand what
punishment.
you're taking. So you're kind of taking an intuitive position, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is kind of I don't mean to be like the walking fucking encyclopedia, right? But this is something that's called the naturalistic fallacy. So the idea is that because it is somehow intrinsic to our nature, that makes it a moral imperative. The problem with this line of thinking is that it doesn't really hold true for almost anything. For instance, let's say that you've got a 7-year-old and he wants to steal something from another kid. That's something that you could feel very naturally. I really want this thing. I want to take it from somebody. Just because he has that impulse, though, doesn't mean that we say, well, that impulse is morally good because he has the impulse. Or say you see an attractive woman walking down the street street and you're in a relationship, you walk up to her and you start hitting on her because you really want to, you know, have sex with her. Well, just because you naturally feel that impulse doesn't make it morally correct. And then also, yeah, like you can find like a million examples. So I don't think that it's something that you intuitively feel. I don't think that's a good guidance for like a moral system. We tend to not construct moral systems on people's personal intuition. Things like slavery or racism can be justified that way too. Well, when I'm around black people, I just feel uncomfortable, or like I don't like people that look different than me. Like you could justify all sorts of stuff that way as well. So I don't think that's a good line of reasoning to go down.
Well, here, let me rephrase it so that there's understanding between me and you. Like I said, I openly said that moralistically, people have different views on different positions. As to, just to point out, one of the positions you held on there was someone being attracted to somebody and hitting on that person. Yeah, there's nothing morally wrong and or right about that.
Well, but we would argue in society that there is something morally wrong about that. That you're betraying the trust of your partner. That
some people would view that, and that's why I'm saying that. What I'm trying to say here is, as an atheist, some people would argue that there is a naturalistic point of view, and so I'm just trying to break that barrier down so nobody views me, oh, well, you're an atheist, so you have to believe in this, you know?
Oh, sure. I'm just saying that I don't think you can ever consistently derive morals from a naturalistic point of view, because you just run into way too many inconsistencies.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Okay.
And so that's why I wanted to get that out of the way.
Okay.
So my moralistic view on life, if we're going to be philosophical about this, is that there is certain things that people agreed on, whether it was the majority or not, and when you look at some religious views, it was the majority. Those things were fine, and those values carried on to Western society. So that was Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Christianity has, while I don't practice it, is a great religion for picking and choosing what it wants to teach over. And Christianity, as the way I've looked at it, is the religion for people that want to have a strong family, where they want a quote-unquote father figure, quote-unquote mother, and you have the children that fall underlined there. So where my argument comes from is the family structure. So not even biologically, because I mean there's biologically cases for where incest, and there's laws in place that say incest is bad. Just to cover on those, but that won't be the main part of my argument. Is in regards to incest, most of the laws there and the way that they're worded is to protect people that are otherwise underage or in a structure of less power than the person that is predating on them. So usually the father and then the daughter, or a older sibling on a younger sibling.
So hold on. So real fast, let's do these one at a time, because we brought up a lot of things. So firstly, in the beginning, you talk about how Christianity has done things a certain way, or we've done things a certain way for a long time, right? Mm-hmm. So again, like I'm not trying to machine gun these out, but this is like an appeal to tradition, right? The reason why we don't like appeals to tradition is because you can justify bad things in the past as being morally okay in the future. So for instance, at one point in time, slavery used to be legal. At one point in time, women weren't allowed to vote. We don't make the argument today that women shouldn't be allowed to vote because at one point in time they weren't allowed to vote, or we should be allowed to hold slaves because at one point in time we were allowed to hold slaves. These things are not legitimate appeals to what morality should be. So we kind of have to discard what happened in the past as guiding morality for the future. We don't typically run things like that. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that?
No, I don't disagree with that.
Okay, so the second part, you spoke about like family structures. So this is stuff that I don't disagree with, but I don't think it's really related to the core idea of incest. So there are several examples. One, you could have two siblings that are infertile, or one is infertile. Would they be allowed to engage in sexual activity with one another under this type of system, because they're not going to produce offspring? Two, you could have siblings that use contraception, so they have no chance of ever producing offspring. Three, you could have them engaging in forms of sexual activity that don't result in offspring, like oral sex or whatever. whatever, or anal sex, so you don't have to worry about it. 4, it could be homosexual incestual relationships, so you wouldn't have to worry about any offspring there. The attack that you're making right now against like a dysfunctional family is a quasi-valid, it's an issue, but the problem is you can mount the same attack against heterosexual people as well. For instance, like, should heterosexual people be allowed to have sex since there are so many single mothers, right? That destroys the family structure as well. This isn't something that is unique to incest.
Well, just because it isn't unique to, first of all, let's just jump back. When talking about the family structure, would you not agree that the family structure is, I won't even say destroyed, but there is a rift in the family structure if you would find out that your siblings were having intercourse? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but again, this isn't a good moral guiding. For instance, in a family in the South, would there be a rift created in the family? I say in the South, that's kind of racist, but would there be a rift created in the family if a father found out that his daughter was dating somebody of a different religion or somebody that was a different skin color? Like, yeah, this could create a rift, but that doesn't mean that that action was morally wrong, right? Maybe the father is just racist or bigoted against people of other types of religion.
Well, again, because you're arguing that, because your position requires that morality is set in stone. Because it can be morally wrong, it can be morally right. You're asking me to argue whether or not incest can be morally wrong.
Well, what I'm basically asking is, if you say something, or sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to say here is the family structure, not even biologically, because yes, because I understand that there is incestuous things that happen in a homosexual, or maybe the heterosexual group, someone's sterile. So that biological argument necessarily doesn't work there. But the family structure. So one of the big things that was argued against homosexuality was, period, not even incestuous, was that it destroyed the structure, the nuclear family. Now, the problem with that argument is that you still had two parents, or at least parents, one that could provide and one that was able to be a caretaker. If you try to put someone in a position where they have to do both, it's a jack of all trades trade-off that you do there, where they're not going to be able to do one job great. They're going to be able to do each one subpar or good at best. They're not going to be as good as people working together. So this is, I don't even have to argue monogamy on this position, because the position is that the family that is able to trade off. So children back then were, you mostly had children because you needed people to work on the farm. That was the only way to survive. That's not a big imperative anymore. The more the imperative is passing on either your moral traits or just your genetic traits as a whole, depending on how you have an outlook on life. So when I argue a structural change, I'm talking about like the nuclear family unable to support itself, because now you have the roles of what was a child now acting as a parent to what would otherwise, so now the child is, who would be their grandparents is now their parents, and it causes this confusion that would be put on the child, because everyone from the outside in is going to have this stable relationship with their parents and their grandparents, but this child now does not, if they can have a child, does not have the structure.
Yeah, so
and
this
whereas
isn't
now
necessarily,
the two children
this isn't
now
necessarily,
don't have the structure.
It's not necessarily an argument against incestual relationships. It's just an argument against incestual procreation. That's probably a bad thing. That's a
No,
much...
because like I asked you, if you found out both your siblings, would that not destroy the nuclear family?
In a culture where incest is normalized, no, it wouldn't. It wouldn't be a big deal at all.
The reason, well, how would it be normalized? In that,
well, how would interracial
relationships
relationships be normalized? I don't know. At one point in time, if you were in an interracial relationship, that could destroy your family. But the fact that your family responds poorly to something doesn't make it a moral imperative to act that way. That's not where we derive our morals or ethics from. basically what I'm asking for you to do, or what you would have to do to make this argument, and it's much more difficult than it seems. What you would have to do is you have to construct a system of morals or ethics axiomatically from the foundation that would get you to saying incest is morally wrong, but not because of some ancillary reason that applies to other things. So for instance, if you say, well, incest is wrong because there's a chance that you could have a baby that's genetically deformed, well, that doesn't really work because that's an argument of eugenics, right? We don't tell normal people, like heterosexual normal people, that they're not allowed to have children because their children might have autism or something, right? If there's some genetic defect they can pass on, right? You have to find something that makes incest on its own, like intrinsically a moral wrong. And the only way that it seems like people can do it is to kind of take these really roundabout routes that don't specifically apply to incest. So for instance, you're giving me this example, what if it causes a rift in the family? But we both agree that there are plenty of things that can cause rifts in the family that don't make them moral wrongs. I mean, fuck, like you could have a kid decide to go to art school and it causes a huge rift in the family, but that doesn't make the decision to go to art school morally wrong to do so, right?
Okay, well, I understand your position there.
So like, right, just to give like an example of like a moral wrong, right? So I would say rape is something that is morally wrong. And my argument for that wouldn't be, well, it makes the family feel bad, or there's a rift, or it can create a baby bub, or whatever, any of that shit. My argument would be rape is morally wrong because from an axiomatic point of view, I believe that people are entitled to their own bodily autonomy. They have their own personal freedoms, and infringement on another person's personal freedoms should be one of the greatest crimes you can commit. So things like stealing, murder, or rape. And raping somebody is doing something to somebody's body against their consent, and that would make it morally wrong under my point of view. And that is specific and core to the idea of rape. It doesn't bring in any kind of ancillary or roundabout, things that impact it, right?
Okay. So in that case, how would you argue pedophilia then?
So pedophilia is something that is probably wrong in society, or that I see as wrong. I guess it depends on the ages in particular. So if we talk about the strict definition of pedophilia for children, like under 12 or 13 or whatever, right, with an adult,
like they do not meet the age of consent.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I just want to speak clearly because like age of consent, like a 20-year-old fucking a 17-year-old is a lot different than like a 25-year-old fucking a 7-year-old, right? So I guess just to be like strict, the reason why pedophilia is usually seen as wrong, and why I believe that it's wrong, is because children typically do not possess the mental faculty to truly consent to a sexual relationship with an older person, and it is almost impossible to be in a position of equal power. So if you're a 7, 8, or 9-year-old child and an adult is propositioning you for sex, one, you can't possibly fully understand the repercussions of consenting to that sexual relationship, so you can't really provide true consent to do it. And two, in almost every single one of those scenarios, the adult is going to hold way more power than the child will. So it makes it difficult, even if we assumed the child did have the ability to consent, it makes it difficult for them to truly consent because they don't know what the repercussions are going to be if they say no, right? Much the same reason we don't like employee-employer relationships, professor-student relationships, and stuff like that.
Okay. And the reason why I wanted to argue this is because this is one of those positions where I want to like learn about how someone likes to argue. And the position of like just incest in general, the way I look at it is there's many things that it ends up covering that as a whole piece it together as something that we decided is immorally wrong.
Well, so what happens is...
immoral, as I should say.
So morally wrong is good. Or go ahead.
Yeah, so because of the fact that when you add in the decay of the nuclear family, which is important for the proper growth of a child, like we see that kids that have parents instead of just a parent do exceptionally better statistically.
Can I help you? Can I help you with this argument? So, if
no, I just want to push on through with what I have to say.
Okay.
Pushing on through what I just said. So there's the nuclear family. Then there's the argument of the issue with genetics. There's the argument of when these cases pop up, it's an issue of it being incestuous, and that it is damaging to what could be a prospective child. And all those three together make a lawful case for why it's illegal.
Oh,
So
okay, so starting from the beginning of these. So again, the issue with genetics, this is an issue of eugenics, which we typically don't legally enforce. So I think that argument doesn't work. We already allow people in society. Ah, shit. Hold on one second. Hello? Oh, my bad. I can give you the rest tomorrow, okay? Yep. Oh yeah, no problem. That's fine. Okay. All right, bye. Fuck, sorry. Um,
that's
so
fine.
yeah, so the problem with genetics is we don't use that argument in any other place in society. We don't tell people that they're not allowed to have children because they have some sort of genetic defect. So the eugenics argument just doesn't work here. The damaging to a prospective child, you're talking more about judgments from the family or judgments from society, and these aren't ways that we usually derive our morals either. And I've given plenty of examples where you agree that it's not a good way to do it. For instance, if society shunned you for having an interracial relationship, we don't agree that that necessarily makes that interracial relationship immoral. Or if society shuns you for a particular thing, that doesn't necessarily make that thing immoral wrong. The nuclear family argument is probably the best one you've got, but in order to do the nuclear family argument, you've got to start to build up a system of morals that necessitates the nuclear family, where you have to be able to say, I believe that the nuclear family, a man, a woman, and a child or two children or whatever, that this is something that ought to be a moral imperative to society, and deviating this should be a moral wrong. And that is a very, very, very difficult argument to make, because you have to make this argument so strongly that it is undeniable that you should be allowed to legally enforce it on other people, that homosexual relationships are immoral, that single parent families are immoral. Like, this is something that's very, very, very difficult to do, that you would have like a huge task ahead of you to assert that a nuclear family is the only morally righteous family that could exist.
Okay.
Do you have any other memes for me?
Sorry?
Or do you have any things you want to bring up? If the Stilgar guy, if you can get him to argue with me, that's fine. There's a whole bunch of writing on this in psychology and philosophy even, where people talk about the difficulty of justifying from a cognitive point of view why some things intuitively feel wrong to us. And incest is like a really good area of that to explore, because incest is one of those things that intuitively it feels really wrong, but then when you try to mount like a cognitive attack against it, it becomes very, very difficult to do so with the way that our society operates today. That's the only reason I enjoy discussing the topic so much, because yeah.
Well, society says it's wrong, yeah, and I believe it's wrong. But a lot of the things that pop up morally end up coming from some reptilian brain we have. Incest is culminated because one, let's be honest, it happened and it still happens, and it's honestly the only way that we could have ever came into existence. Not even if we think about Christianity wise, there was a lot of incest, but we know for a fact with how many generations have came through let's say just the Homo sapien line, that there was incest. There had to be. It's the only way that we could have had the population boom that we had. So I'm not going to say it didn't happen, and I'm never going to argue that it never happened. But because it happened, we saw like whatever recessive genes pop up, and that causes health defects, and it causes large swaths of people to die from one illness. So genetically and biologically, we were taught through our reptilian brain to avoid that through different means, whether it be the scent of a partner. One of the big tell-offs for someone that may be related to you is the fact that they smell off to you. Because on your body you have different biological
I understand, like, I understand all these
everything.
things that you're discussing, but again, like, you have to be careful that bridging these are scientific facts into these are philosophical oughts. These are things that are very difficult to do. Like, we can talk about different, like, people have tendencies to do a lot of things, but that doesn't really tell us whether it should be morally right or wrong, right? Like, we do a lot of things that are kind of against our biological imperative, like wearing clothes and wearing shoes and stuff. These are things that we do that we don't really have like a huge biological inclination towards. But if a woman was walking down the street completely bare naked and she walks by a school or some shit, a lot of people would be very fucking upset about that. But why? It's just a naked person. Like, biologically speaking, it's not really that big of a deal. Kids see their mom's boobs when they breastfeed. Like, it shouldn't be that big of a deal, right? But people would argue that that's a moral wrong, not from any kind of biological or reptilian brain imperative, but because of what we've decided as a society our morals and ethics should be, right?
But I could also argue that killing somebody is okay because they killed somebody else, but it's still murder.
Well, you have to be careful. Like, again, like, you can argue killing somebody in self-defense or as a form of not retribution.
But it's still murder. And
yeah, you have to be careful with that because murder is like specifically defined as like killing somebody without justification. So you just have to be careful with using that word.
No, murder is the legal definition of murder is another human killing another human premeditatively.
Yeah, but but also unlawfully.
Premeditatively going to kill somebody.
But also
if
unlawfully.
Defending yourself, right?
Well, no. If you kill somebody in self-defense, it's not called murder.
Yes, but you have to prove defense. It is not just innately defense, right? So
yeah, of course you have to prove it.
I could argue that murder isn't intrinsically wrong. That's one of the things, because killing is a mode of survival.
Well, you would argue that killing.
Time.
I think you would argue that killing isn't intrinsically wrong, but murder is something that is usually by definition wrong, because murder, it has unlawful like in the definition. Like,
again, murder is the lawfully a human killing another human.
Unlawfully, though. I'm almost positive that if we look up the definition of murder. Noun, murder, the unlawful premeditated killing of one human being or another as a noun, verb, killing someone unlawfully and with premeditation. The law thing is an important part that's baked into the definition of murder. If I look up on Wikipedia, murder is the unlawful killing of another human without justification or valid excuse. So you wouldn't say that like killing somebody in self-defense is murdering them in self-defense. You would never use that term that way.
Okay, so murder was defined as killing another human being with malice aforethought. Malice aforethought is a legal term of art that encompasses the following types of murder: intent to kill, grievous bodily harm, felony murder, depraved heart murder. So that's from Cornell Law School.
I mean, like, if I run over somebody in my car, it's not called murder. I don't go to court for murder. I go to court for manslaughter. It's not the same thing, right? You would never convict somebody of murder, for second-degree murder, because they ran over somebody in a car.
Again, because murder is a lawful term, so I can argue it the same way that I could argue our incest thing. That's the point I'm trying to bring across here.
Wait, what do you mean?
Is because murder is a legal term, so therefore intrinsically it is a term made by me as a human.
Yeah, but then you're just appealing to tradition again. Just because something is a law doesn't make it moral.
No, but I'm trying to show you that I could argue why murder is fine.
How could you argue that? What would your argument look like?
Well, because it says like I said, it's with malice aforethought.
Okay.
Do you think, like I said, it's intent to kill, or it's the intent to kill is what it's a legal term of art.
Okay.
Right. So I have the intent to kill you if you're shooting at me.
No, but no, that's not how. That's not how
I don't want to die.
That's not how
that's
it
what
works.
It's saying.
No, that's not how it works in our legal system lawfully. If you kill someone in self-defense, it's not described as though the defendant murdered the other person, but he murdered them in self-defense.
You have to prove that it was in self-defense.
Well, you have to prove that it wasn't murder. That's part of the definition. If you prove that you killed somebody in self-defense, then you've escaped the term murder. You're not a murderer at that point.
Yes, but that's my point. The term incest. Here, let's Let's look for the legal because I already have the legal definition of incest already here, just so that I can make sure what defines something as incest. So, marriage to a person who is under 18 years of age and who is known to the offender to be related to the offender as any of the following biological step or adoptive relatives: child, grandchild of any degree, brother, sister, half-brother, half-sister, uncle, aunt, nephew, or niece, or this is the second part, engaging
If I
in
murdered
otherwise
Hitler
lawful
illegal when I
sexual
lived in
intercourse or sodomy as
1940s
defined
Germany,
by
is that morally
KSI
wrong?
213501
Also, what was
and
that
amendments
gift check?
thereto, or B, any lewd fondling as described in subsection it's just number 3053 and amendment thereto.
Wait, so what are we arguing?
I'm arguing that if the legal definition of murder, it can be superseded, so can the legal definition of incest.
Wait, well, okay, I don't even agree with the first part, that the legal definition of murder can be superseded, but even if it could be, what does this have to do with morality?
Because I'm trying to talk to you about, because you asked me to, because murder is a legal definition, right?
Well, hold on, even in your Cornell link, I don't know if you didn't see it or not, but even at that it says, murder occurs when one human being unlawfully kills another human being.
The precise legal definition of murder varies by jurisdiction. There, so that's the background of different.
But I'm telling you anecdotally, and I know there's not going to be a single lawyer that you'll ever talk to that disagrees with this. Murder has a very specific definition. Manslaughter and things like that are very different. If somebody runs over somebody in a car, like for drunk driving, not like if you're trying to kill someone, you never call it murder. Or if somebody kills somebody in self-defense and you prove in court it was self-defense, nobody calls that murder. And I still don't see how this gets us over to morality, because legal definitions aren't how we determine what is morally right or wrong.
The legal definition is used for a lot of moral cases.
No, it's not. That's absolutely not. Our laws come from our morals.
The reason why So if our morals say that murder is intrinsically wrong, then why is the legal case for incest any different?
So law comes from morals, but morals never come from law. This should be a one-way process. So when we're having a discussion on morals, you can't go from law, you can't derive your morals from your laws. Because if that's how every discussion on morals went, then the first set of laws created would never ever change, right?
No. What I'm saying is, if we can derive murder as illegal, and it came morally, then the incest laws that we have, as I read them to you, would not exist.
Okay, but if somebody was getting into a philosophical discussion on why murder was wrong, it would be the same thing I gave for rape. It has nothing to do with the law. I would never cite the law when somebody tells me, why is murdering wrong? And I don't do it when I talk to my kid. If my kid is like, well, why shouldn't I steal? I would never say because a policeman will arrest you. I would say that you can't steal because that doesn't belong to you, and it's not fair to take things from other people. You're infringing on their property. It's not right. You'd never say like, well, it's against the law to do something. That's not a valid way to construct any moral system. Because if we go back 50 years, whatever the law was back then, if anybody ever wanted to change the law, you would just go, well, you can't change the law. And they would go, why? Because what you want to change it to is immoral. And they would go, well, how is it immoral? And you go, well, it's immoral because this is what the law currently says. Like, that's a circular thing. It would be a system that perpetuates itself forever.
Okay. Thank you. Anyways, since you pointed that out for me, what was it? Where is it? One moment. There we are. So it's morally wrong because if intrinsically it affects another person. When we talk about the immorality of incest and the nuclear family, and I know that you said specifically man and a woman. I argued parents instead of just parent. Okay, so I just wanted, because the nuclear family can still exist with a homosexual marriage. That's fine. That as long as you have one person that can focus on the caretaking of a child, and one person that can focus on the the sustainability of the family itself, then that's the nuclear family.
I mean, not everybody would agree with that. That
what builds
definition is pretty
structure.
unique. Most people, when they say the nuclear family, are usually talking about man, woman, and children. But I mean,
Well, that's more like that's the Catholic version. The
Oh.
marriage should only be between a man and a woman.
okay. Well, so if you want to expand that to
that's more of the Catholic family. The nuclear family is based on the 60s idea that you had the stay-at-home mom and the work 8 to 5 or whatever dad.
sure. So
And
how do we?
so you can interchange those roles with 2 dads and 2 moms.
Okay, what if you interchange those
doesn't-
roles with a sibling, with 2 siblings?
Someone that hasn't grown to age.
No, they can go to age. I'm not talking about pedophilia. Say you get a 20-year-old and a 21-year-old brother and sister that want to start a family. Why can't that be the new nuclear family now?
Because if that happens, then, well, first of all, you already go into the biological sense of the problem, where first of all, the kids themselves are disproportionately going to be affected by whatever disease that is carried on your family.
Do you
'cause
think
have no
that-
way to protect the recessive gene?
Do you think that most
So you're already
heterosexual
affecting
people...
the health of the child?
Sure. Do you think that heterosexual people that have genetic defects shouldn't be allowed to procreate?
Like what?
Like anything.
what
If
do you
if you have some sort of it could be something as simple as color blindness. It could be something as severe as Down syndrome. I think some forms of ASD are tied to genetics. I know that like Parkinson's and a lot of neurodegenerative diseases are tied to genetics. Do you think that if you have any of these types of like genetic diseases, that you shouldn't be allowed to have children?
Do I personally think that
Yeah.
passing on genetic, as I'm arguing here, that genetic dispositions to
Huntington's.
children
Well,
is
no,
wrong?
so we're arguing. Yeah, we're arguing. Should somebody
Yeah.
who? So you think
Should
that it
someone
should
knowingly pass a disease to their children?
be? Okay, so you
Like
think
just
that it is
genetic disease? No,
Sure.
I don't. I
So
don't.
you think it is
it's
immoral for
I don't
people
th- I
that-
think it is immoral
Okay.
to pass on a genetic disease, something that would cause pain to a living being.
Okay, so then you're in favor of eugenics to some extent, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll
So
be open about it. Yes, I am.
what about 2 incestuous people that got together and had their incest relationship, but they adopted children?
Where they adopted children. So it's still the parents. So let's just say that the incestuous couple is like they can't have children, so they adopt.
Sure.
Is the idea.
Or they
Okay.
decide to because they don't want to risk them to genetic
yeah,
diseases.
so they're not able to have a child for whatever reason, and they have a child, adopted child. Okay, in that case, honestly, that just goes back to the issue of the nuclear family, because
Well, but I'm asking
now
why
you
can't
have-
incestuous twins be a nuclear family with an adopted child? What's wrong with this?
because the structure of the family is now you have the brothers who are now parents.
Well, it can be
Or the
brother
brother
sister.
sister or the
Yeah,
brother
why
brother,
does it
the
matter if
sister,
they're
sister,
parents?
they're parents. Because the same structure that put them where they are is broken. The structure itself is broken because now you have people playing double shift.
What do you mean by double
It's the
shift?
issue because now they're brother and sister,
But who cares?
or they're brother and brother. They're
To
sister
the
and
children,
sister.
they'd just be mom and dad.
Well, to the children, no, that would not be the case at all, because there would be the issue with the parents of your brother and sister. Or
You just
whatever
have one
sister-
set of grandparents.
Sorry.
You would just have one set of grandparents. That would be the only
Oh,
difference.
you'd have one. Yeah. It's still an issue with
What?
the grandparents.
Why is it an issue?
Like I said, what has happened is you've torn the nuclear family.
Wait, no. I'm
In
asking
two
why this can't be
positions.
the nuclear family. You've got a brother and a
Oh,
sister.
okay,
They
so
get
why this
together,
can't be the
and now you have
nuclear
because you included
Yep.
gays into there.
Okay.
It's somewhat arbitrarily. Gays are now thrown into the nuclear family. What about a brother and sister that adopt 2 children? They've got one set of
Brother and
grandparents.
sister adopted 2 children. The
Yeah.
reason and why they can't be the nuclear family. Okay, so sorry, I misunderstood you. they can't be the nuclear family because not necessarily. So let's step away from, let's just say the family itself.
Well, the moral imperative on your end was that the nuclear family was something that needed to be cherished and protected. So we're focusing on why it can't be the nuclear family.
So
why can't this be included?
let's just say let's just talk about the brother, sister, and the kids. So I'll even leave the grandparents out of it, or whatever the case may be.
Okay.
That's when we fall into the legal ramifications of it. Right?
No, that's not how we get morals, though.
But the thing is, a set of morals doesn't come from one set. There's multiple things that decide whether or not something is good.
So you think that if something is legal, it's morally righteous, and if something is illegal, that it's morally wrong? You think that's a good argument to make?
No.
Well, then why are you citing law as your way to get this morality?
It's not that the fact that the legal ramifications. It's not necessarily the fact. It's the issue that now you have children that are in an unstable family because of the legal ramifications of the brother, sister.
Okay, so would you have argued that 100 years ago it would be like immoral for a black and a white person to date? That's immoral because their children could be in an unstable family situation? Like you're trying to derive morality from law here.
Well, it was immoral back then. Like I said, morality is
like right now you're arguing about the pragmatic implementation of incest rather than the actual morality behind it. Like I would agree that I could agree with you that an incestuous relationship would be very difficult because of legal reasons and would probably cause a lot of problems because of legal reasons. I wouldn't disagree with that, but you're not arguing about whether it should be morally acceptable or not. You're just arguing about like what would happen in the real world like right now. This has nothing to do with morality, but just how would people react?
So, but we're trying to argue here, we understood that morality is based on how one person is affected by a certain person's actions.
No, we're not. That's not at all the argument. We're arguing about whether something should be morally acceptable or not how somebody is impacted by somebody's actions.
That's where morality stems from.
Not
how someone is affected by another person's actions.
No, that's just one of many parts of morality. Morality is essentially asking the question of how ought we act. That's essentially what morality is, right? We're asking what ought we do and what ought we not do. What are things that should be seen as morally good and what are some things that should be seen as morally bad? That's essentially what morality is. Now, how we impact other people is part of our morality, sure. In a roundabout way, you could argue that an incestuous relationship is selfish or wrong because you put the children in a really awkward spot. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, but at that point, we're not arguing about the morality of incest itself, because we would never use that as saying like, well, incest is morally wrong because it creates like a friction in society, because there are plenty of things that can create frictions in society that aren't necessarily morally wrong. So you're not really addressing the core question there of why is it morally wrong.
Okay. You actually have me stumped.
Well, it's a really interesting question to think about, my dude. The reason why it's so difficult is because most of the arguments that you give are never intrinsic to incest. Like, you can never say, like, incest is wrong because a brother and a sister shouldn't do this. Like, those statements are almost never made. It's usually, like I said before, like, attacking ancillary issues, so.
Yeah.
Well, hey, buddy, if you think of anything in the future, feel free to shoot me a DM. We can talk about it again if you want. Or if you Google it, there's a lot of really, really interesting people that are way smarter than me that have thought a lot about this issue as well, so.
Yeah. Because the way that I look at morality, there's certain points and where it's fluid, and there's certain points where there is a rigid understanding just because of a mixture of societal norms and biological imperatives. So when I look at...
Well, no. The biological imperatives is not how we derive morality generally, because that leads us down really dangerous roads, I think.
There is... incest is one of them. They're and
But interracial
murder. No one
relationships
wants
used
to
to be one of
die.
them.
No one wants to die. So everyone can agree that murder
But that's not
sucks.
true. Nobody wants to go to the doctor and get a vaccination. It hurts, but we still do it. Why do we force people to do it there?
Well,
Like,
we don't force anyone to go to the doctor,
well, yeah,
though.
parents absolutely force their children. But why is it okay for a dad to force his child to go to the hospital, but it's not okay for a dad to rape his child, right? There has to be something more here.
I don't agree that there's an argument there where you're saying that someone getting hurt hospitally. There is a good reason to go to the hospital because no one wants to die.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly.
If you're going to the hospital, there is a like you're gonna go and do something and weigh it based on the risk and rewards.
Sure.
That's what vaccinations is.
Sure.
I don't force anybody to get a vaccination.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but I'm just saying that, like, that's not a biological imperative. This is a cognitive process. If I were to lay out a bunch of animals and they could walk into a room and get vaccinated to live longer, none of them would do it, because if they walk into that room and get poked, they're going to be very upset. Have you ever taken a cat to the vet before? Animals are never happy to go to do any of this shit, right? Or you know, like, there's tons of examples of people where you're like, one of your biggest biological imperatives is to be lazy as fuck, right? That's one of our biggest things, because you have to be lazy to conserve energy. It's why so many people get fat, right? We're not naturally geared to be to be very active. But just because you're biologically predisposed to do something doesn't make it a morally righteous thing to do, or to steal things from people, or to be jealous or envious of people, or to rape people, or to murder people.
Again, though, you're conflating me saying that biological imperativeness is the be-all, end-all.
Well, but it can't even be a factor.
I'm saying
it can't even be a factor in it, because biological imperatives can lead you down a ton of roads that aren't things that we would consider morally acceptable.
Yes, but there's a ton of roads that lead people to believe that having sex with children is fine.
Okay.
So
the thing is, I could challenge all those. Like, nobody can make that argument to me and win. I know, I'm very confident. Or they would have to construct their system of morality would have to be very, 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 very different than anything that I accept or anything that most people accept, and it would be a very, very hard argument to make.
Okay. Well, what would you say to someone that would argue that the clock in which someone is biologically meant to have a child is there? Why is it morally wrong to now have a child with that what I would think is a kid? Why is that moralistically wrong?
Wait, so why is it wrong to have a child with somebody that's underage?
Yes, moralistically, if we're going to put it this way.
It would go back to the consent issue that I spoke about earlier, that children aren't typically able to consent to these types of sexual relationships.
Typically able to consent. Yeah, typically. So you've already put a hole in your argument saying that, oh, well, they can't always. You've already put a grain of where someone can already say, well, you just said typically, so that means there is children that can give consent.
Yes, but the problem is it's impossible to determine it ever, so we typically just don't do it ever.
But how do you determine?
You can't. It's a black box.
Exactly.
So let me give you an example. But no, hold on, stop.
But
hold on. I have to explain. I have to finish this because this is how the argument goes. Okay. So let's say you have an employee-employer. Okay. Let's say that a boss wants to fuck an employee. Okay. Now, is it possible that this type of relationship could exist consensually? Yeah, there are definitely cases where a boss and an employee could feel mutual attraction towards one another and want to start a relationship. That's something that absolutely could happen. But the problem is that it is impossible for any party to genuinely determine whether or not that relationship is consensual, including the people that are taking part in that relationship. So even though the possibility exists that a consensual relationship could exist there, we deem it as a moral wrong, because if either party propositions the other side, you've made it impossible to genuinely determine if the consent can happen. So like.
Well, okay. Well, then in that case, what about a position? That means that the only way to know for certain that someone has given consent, that both parties have to be in perfect, I mean, like lock-tight conditions that are equal to each other. That's what your
no, I didn't say it had to be perfect. I'm just saying that there are certain powers.
No, they would have to be, because any doubt that either people makes a dollar more than the other person, that you've already cast a doubt on their consent because someone
No.
technically has financial power over the other person.
No.
Yes, well, that's what you
No.
argued.
So I didn't argue that at all. I wasn't arguing that one person had financial power. I was arguing that one person had actual power over the other person. Your boss doesn't
What's
have
actual power?
the ability to fire you or detrimentally impact your job. Just because somebody makes a dollar more than you. Well,
someone that doesn't have financial power over you, I make twice the amount. Or like, let's say my girlfriend doesn't have a job, I make twice the amount of her, and I just kick her out unless she has sex with me. Is that not a position of power?
Yeah, and those types of situations can exist, sure.
And then that's why you wouldn't be able to argue consent. Period. You wouldn't be able to argue consent.
Wait, hold
for
on,
anyone.
stop. No. So backing up to the boss
because
thing.
That's where your position is.
No,
You're
that's not where my position is. Backing up to
consent.
Okay, so backing up to the boss thing, okay?
Okay.
The reason why your boss has power over you has nothing to do with the amount of money you make. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. The issue with the boss thing is that he has in a position.
They have power over you, yes. And I'm pointing out that someone that has financial stability over somebody else has power.
Okay.
They have more money than the person. They affect that person's life because if they don't.
I'm not talking about any of this at all. I don't know where this is coming from. This is nothing that what I'm talking about. So the thing with the boss is that
it's called an analogy. You've pointed out, you've taken an analogy where a person has a position of power over another person because of their status within the job market. I have taken.
No, that's not what I said at all. That's not my argument at all.
That is what you're doing.
That's not my argument at all.
You're saying that you're unable to decide perfectly whether that person is able to give consent because of their position over someone. You said
nope, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. You're not rephrasing my argument at all.
Say it again.
Okay, so my argument is that when you're in a position where the other person has a direct impact on the success of your job, it has nothing to do with how much money they make or anything like that. I'm saying that these are positions where the consent issue is insanely blurred, such that these relationships are typically seen as immoral. Okay. It has nothing to do with him earning more money or whatever other shit you're talking about.
Again, this is where you're confusing. We've gone away from the boss argument here now. Okay. What I'm telling you is if we boil down what you've just said, one person has a position of power over another person. That's why we can't decide without any shadow of a doubt that consent is real. The same way that if someone has the financial power over somebody else, we cannot, without a shadow of doubt, I make the money in the household, I have the financial power within that household. That is a power over somebody. So if you're going to tell me that we can't discern without a shadow of doubt that the boss relationship can't give without a shadow of doubt consent, then my position with my girlfriend would also be a position where we can't have with a shadow of doubt consent.
Sure, and it's possible it's possible that could start at one point in time, but the idea is that the relationship doesn't usually start with the woman is living with you and now you're deciding whether or not you wanted to be in a relationship or not. So like an analogy to this thing that would be more accurate here would be like a tenant, like a building owner getting into a relationship with a tenant there. That would be like a really weird thing if that person couldn't afford it and then the building owner started to approach that lady is trying to get in a relationship with her because now she thinks maybe she can get a place to live if she does it or whatever. That's where like the consent issues get hardcore blurred. If somebody is engaging in a relationship with you and at some point during that relationship you acquire more money with them, that's seen as more morally permissible because your girlfriend didn't initially make the decision to join the relationship with you while she's already
morally permissible. Because there is a fluidity.
No, I'm sorry. Morally permissible and morally good. These are the same things.
Well, you just said more morally permissible. in that situation.
Sure, because some of these areas because some of these
What I'm trying
areas.
to point out here is that there is a fluidity to morality, and it's not set in stone.
Sure, when you talk about
So
issues of consent, a lot of these get like a little
why-
bit gray. I don't deny that, but you've gotten nowhere
but that's
near
why
establishing that with incest. You're not even close to getting there with incest or pedophilia. These are things that are very clearly wrong, that are very clearly in one direction. You're trying to find like very, very, very minute, like, well, how much power is too much power over another person? And these are things that you can definitely split hairs with, but we're really far away from an area where a 40-year-old fucking a 10-year-old is morally permissible. We're way, 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 way far away from that. You're not even close to breaching that topic.
Yes, because Western values have put us in a position where it is morally wrong to do that. We can mostly agree that it's wrong to do that in Western society, whereas in other societies, that is not the case. That's what I'm trying to pass on here, is that there is fluidity in morality, and philosophy misses that point a lot.
Wait, no, what?
Morality
Philosophy addresses
misses that
different.
point a lot.
Wait. So
Morality
is your
misses
argument just
the
that
point.
everything should be morally relativistic and there should be no morals at all because everybody can believe in different things and you shouldn't have to justify any system, or?
That's the system that brought us to where we are.
No, not at all. I mean, if that's what you agree, then I don't know why you ever DM me, because then you think incest is just fine, because some people think it's okay, so it must be okay.
No, I'm saying that because it's fluid, that there is a reason why we've come to the conclusion that through biology and through decisions made society, that it is immoral to do that.
But I've already shot
because
down
of
the
the
biology
fact
thing. I've
that
already shot down
there's
the
something
society thing. These
biologically-
arguments have already been defeated. You can't keep bringing them back up.
No.
Like, you keep bringing up
'cause
arguments that we've already
yes,
agreed aren't rational.
Okay, so you're arguing from a philosophical standpoint.
Sure.
Yes. I'm arguing from a biological and a societal standpoint.
But we already agreed that the biological
Based on
standpoint wasn't a good one
Should
to
this guy stop
Oh, wait, wait.
talking? Vodia or voda
Based
name
on
if
biological,
they're
based on
No, like
legality?
that based legality.
Okay, but
not
I
that
thought we
it
already
was
agreed
based
that
by
constructing
legality.
morality based on biology was
No, no.
wrong. Or
We didn't agree. I never agreed to that. I agreed that.
Well, wait. Okay,
and
wait. Okay, well then
never
we can talk about that. Let's
that
say.
it was the best way to do it by itself.
Okay, so my neighbor has a huge TV, and I really want that TV. I really fucking want it. I feel a huge biological impulse to go steal it. Why shouldn't I do it? Let's say I'm bigger than my neighbor too, so I can beat him up.
Because of societal norms, and
So- okay,
also
so now you're saying-
biologically, you yourself don't want your shit stolen.
That has nothing to do with biology. Say I've got a lot of guns.
Yeah,
I'll
it
fuck anybody up
does.
if they come to my house. No, it doesn't. No, this is not.
Territory is a big thing about.
Okay, well,
biology.
I've got my territory protected. I've
Resources
got
resource-
IEDs set up in my
protection of
driveway,
resources,
so if anybody
collection of
walks in,
resources is a big thing
Sure.
about biology.
If
because
anybody-
it's how we decide on who we're gonna breed with.
okay, so if
That was
anybody
the
walks
big
into my
side.
yard, they're gonna get blown up because I've got mines and shit all over my shit. Now I want to walk across the street. I want to steal all my neighbor's stuff. What's to keep me from doing it? Because that's my biological impulse. You can't bring up society because then you're saying that
the protection of other people, but
that's not a
again,
biological impulse. I don't feel the
but
impulse to protect
we
other
do
people.
have laws protecting.
But we're not talking about laws. You
because
brought up
biologically
biology.
know that no one wants their shit stolen.
Okay, so then you don't think that biology matters then. You can't keep if I ask you
No, I never said biology doesn't matter. I'm saying that we take our morals from more than just one spot. There's not just one little thing that we grab from and then place down
But
and say,
there has to be. You can't
"That's
just
our
pick
moral."
and choose like
No,
different
no,
sources of
there-
your
there isn't.
Then you have no
There
consistent
isn't.
morality. Then you're just picking and it's
Then
all arbitrary.
Then why doesn't every single person have the same morals as every other person? Why is there such a significant change based on whether it be incest, whether it be murder, whether it be this, whether it be that? It's not even considered murder depending on who you ask who they're killing.
Just because
So
different people have different moral systems doesn't mean we can say that it's reasonable for any individual moral system to be constructed from from multiple different ideas, if that makes sense. So two people can have totally valid and totally internally consistent moral systems that disagree with one another, but that's different than having a person with a moral system that just picks and chooses from a ton of different inconsistent platforms. Those are two different things.
That's assuming that they're inconsistent platforms. Again,
but they are, because you want to say that I think I should be able to generate my morals using biology, and then I go, well, what about this point here where biology doesn't make any sense? You go, oh, well, in that point, I want to do it from legal shit. That doesn't make sense. Why are you picking and choosing?
Where's the biological imperative that you've just pointed out that doesn't make sense? I've already told you that even on your stealing one, there's already something. The reason why people steal is because they want things. Because they want things, they don't want their stuff stolen. So people decided that instead of stealing from each other, they said, let's not steal from each other. Let's put in laws.
This has nothing to do with biology, though, my dude. This is a cognitive process. This is a social contract. This has nothing to do with biology. This is way, way, way far removed from biological impulse.
The reason why we collect stuff, the reason why we do it, is even if you look at fucking whatever, there's what is it? It's God, I can't remember. It's like the flat-nosed like squid or something like that. But there's two mating groups. There's ones that pretend to be women to copulate with the other women. It's a sneak tactic. You have the other males who predominantly mate through just bravado. So you have two groups that have chosen two different ways to do something. That is biological imperative. We collected resources. You look at chiefs of Native America. They collected resources, especially if you were a farming group. You collected resources as a chief to show that you as a person were smart enough to not only, one, be able to farm properly, because biologically, intelligence reigned king when we were just mating for the sake of growing our tribe. And well, technically it's still really imperative, especially if you want your children to be successful, you can't be an idiot and be a computer science degree major, you know?
So what you're doing is you're deriving like very high level cognitive concepts. You're trying to say that these are biological things. Like you can't with a straight face say that, but they're not, dog. You can't with a straight face. You're essentially saying that because we're all biological beings, everything we do is biological. The social contract is not a biological impulse. That's a ridiculous assertion. Nobody would agree with that.
Because the reason for social gathering is because the fact that we hunt.
Okay.
That's the only reason why.
Okay.
It's true.
Well, it's not. Nobody would agree with this. No. That's not true. That's not true. Nobody would agree with that. That's like saying every single thing we do, like whether or not I want to kill somebody in Call of Duty or whether or not I missed the shot, is a biological impulse, because biologically I've determined whether or not I'm going to have the discipline to practice a game, and then biologically I'm going to determine what food I eat in order to prepare me for this game, and then biologically I have to move my finger. Like, it doesn't work like that. Nobody talks about philosophy like that. You don't say that everything is a biological impulse because in like 50 million steps back we can get to like some sort of biology. Nobody would say that the social contract is a biological impulse. That's a cognitive process that you have to reason out.
Yes, the cognitive process that was bred through millions of years of evolution.
Okay.
You can't, because now
I'm just saying. We're not getting into anything because nobody thinks this way.
We're getting into the idea that humanity in some way is superior to other beings on planet Earth. We're all animals. We all came from the same 4.2 billion years ago on this planet.
Okay, would you say that the social contract is a law of physics?
Hang up on this retard.
You actually have to preface this idea.
Well, it is. Everything is physics. Because if you want to go all the way back to biology for everything, well, I'm just going to say that biology is the result of physics interacting with one another. All the chemical interactions that occur in our brains can be described by chemistry. Everything in chemistry can be extrapolated by physics. So technically, it's not actually a biological imperative. It's actually a law of the universe imperative. The way that everything is happening right now is the result of us being the creation of stardust that has all come together in physical kinds of ways. So the study of physics is actually the study of morality, because we can infinitely reduce everything to physical reactions. Why stop at biology? Why not go all the way back to physics?
I mean, there's no reason not to be honest.
Okay. All right. Listen, I've appreciated the conversation. I have a meeting that I'm
No,
supposed to be at.
okay, don't
What?
be like that. Like, don't give me this type
Well, the
thing.
problem
No.
is what you said
'Cause-
is like
no,
so
no, no,
absolute.
No.
Because you said something.
Are you saying that we have not evolved to communicate with other human beings the way that we have?
No, I'm saying that the problem is you're using terms and stuff that nobody uses these like this. So the conversation is really absurd. Like, I can't get into an argument with somebody about the
Because
social contract who's saying that, well, the social contract is an extension of biological impulse. Like, that doesn't really make sense, because when you talk about biological impulse, you're usually talking about actions that are just.
Doesn't make sense.
Because you're reducing things to such an absurd extreme. Like, if you wanted to get into it just doesn't make sense. I don't know. It would take me like an hour to explain, I guess, like how you derive like philosophy or ethics in a way that it's not like biological impulse. It would take a long time to do this, and I don't really have the time right now to do it. I guess like if you look it up or talk to people that I guess are into philosophy, there's people that know way more about it than me. You're never going to find somebody, like if you go to your school and you go to your philosophy department, if he's like, hey, do you think the social contract is just a biological impulse? Like, nobody's going to say like, oh yeah, it's just biological imperative.
Where did the social contract come from then?
The cognitive processes aren't typically thought of as biological impulse, is what most people would say. Like, it's just not a thing. Like, it just doesn't make sense to say it that way. Like, because we thought of something like the Zeta hypothesis or whatever, like, is a biological impulse because human beings wrote down math equations that made them biological impulses because we evolved to be good at math. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to look at it that way.
So it doesn't make sense to look at something through an imperative of survival.
Correct. Because we don't typically function that way in society today. We do a lot of things that aren't imperative to our survival. We play video games. These aren't imperative to our survival. These aren't come from biological impulse. Or are we?
Well, I'm gonna stop you there, because the reason why we play video games is because our brain is starved for like psychological impulse. It is required for us to be stimulated, to be stressed in some way in order to survive. That is something.
Why do we go to
is
school?
necessary.
Is that a biological impulse? Because we thirst for knowledge?
Not all children choose to go to school. Some choose to
It's
do
legally
something
mandated
entirely.
today that all children go to grade
It's
school.
Not in all not
In the
everywhere
United
is
States
it
of
legally.
America, it is mandated that you attend school until you're like 16 or something. So why do people go to
Okay,
school?
well,
Or why does
just-
anybody go to college? Is it a biological imperative to go to college because they chose it and they're they chose it and they're a biological being?
I mean, if you're going to put it to the position where they want to be, especially if we're going to argue about mating prospects here, most like what is it? You're 2 times more likely to get into a college if you're a woman. Most women hold college degrees, so most women are looking for men with college or on par education with them. No one wants to be with an idiot.
Is there any human behavior that you can give that isn't an example of biological imperative? Any single behavior that isn't?
Because I mean, when
Or
you look
anything
at
all. Does anything exist in our world that's not biological imperative? Or is everything biological imperative?
honestly, when you boil it all down to it, it's the gather resource and a mate. That's all it boils down to.
Then why are people having less and less children these days? The most successful
That's
people
not
have the least.
true.
What do you mean? It is true. There's negative birth rates all across the Western world, and the wealthiest people have the fewest amount of kids.
Well, if we're gonna go through there, the reason why most of them don't have children is one, because the time that was otherwise sucked up for them to have children was during their career phase. And you can look at a bunch of women that have regretted that fact. There is many women, and you're going to see a jump in the next 10 years because the technology for freezing eggs is growing. That's a big thing that these career women are doing right now.
So all of
that's
these women
that's
that
an
are wealthy,
effect.
that have less and less children, that are continuing to have less and less children, and have for years and years, you making this prediction that in a decade, that whole trend that's existed across the entire Western world is going to reverse? Do you have like research to back this up, or are you like a PhD, or?
Here, I'll pass on the information for you.
Do you enjoy these meme debates more than video games
Because the
now?
reason why, like I was saying, is career women
And also, what's the
have
point
an
of saying?
issue of not, because like I said, first of all, career women are usually intelligent and they're already in a position to sustain themselves. Mostly what happens is career women around their late 30s, early 40s decide they want children, but usually there's a complication where having children is much harder for them. And to add on to that fact, the baby boom that we had back in the 40s, the number of people that grew up in that phase had children close to what that baby boom had. We had two baby booms. The second one wasn't as big as the other. This new group is put in a position where not only is the economic stance not as high because they didn't come from an economic boom. Because I mean, the 40s, the 30s, they had the worst depression that we have ever seen, and then we have the 40s after the war, where economic stimulus was very high, so it was very easy to have a job and then to sustain that family because everything was relatively cheap per the dollar you made. Now we're in a position where the per dollar that you need to sustain a family has inflated substantially more. I think it's around a little over 200% more.
If it costs more money to have a family, then why wouldn't people that are richer have more children than people that are poor?
Because the time needed to get that type of money is
then why do poor people have children if they don't have the money to do it?
Have that child.
Why do poor people have children if they don't have the money?
I mean, if we want to bring up the 77 cents to the dollar thing, we can
wait, because we keep jumping topics. Can you explain to me why don't poor people stop having kids if they don't have the money for it?
Because we have a system that rebates them for children.
Then why don't rich people just have kids if they can get rebated for it?
Because again, they don't have the time to.
If they don't have the time, does that mean they're ignoring?
Okay.
If they don't have the time, does that mean they're ignoring their biological imperative to have children? Because you said it all came down to resources and children.
They're ignoring it for a time being.
Okay,
but then it comes back to the fact.
So then you're saying that there is something beyond biological impulse.
Ignoring it for a time and then regretting it is not the same as never having it.
Can you think of any other animal besides a human being that ignores their biological impulse for a given point in time and delays reward or gratification?
Rabbits.
How?
In fact, one of the things with rabbits is that they can genetically abort. They're genetically predisposed to be able to abort during times of drought.
Okay, so that's literally eating your kid to survive. That's a biological imperative.
No. When there is a fetal growth, they can genetically abort that child. They're not.
You said, but during times of drought.
Drought. So that means.
So this is a survival imperative.
Resources.
Yeah. So this is a survival imperative. This is a biological imperative. This isn't they're making the cognitive choice to forego having children because the bunny is pursuing a career in agriculture to grow carrots. This is a biological impulse. Can you give me an example of animals that delay gratification or something that's not like a direct biological impulse? Because you're saying that everybody functions off of wanting to have kids and gather resources, so I don't know why these women would put off having kids if they can't have them when they're too late or when they get the resources to have the kids.
Well, in any case, that would be what if you want it that way, then any homosexual animal.
Wait, what?
Well, are you saying that a homosexual animal is going to have children?
No.
There's your example.
Are there a lot of homosexual animals?
There is homosexual animals.
I know is homosexual behavior in animals. That doesn't mean the animal is strictly homosexual. But even so, sexuality is a biological impulse, my dude. We're still not to cognitive processes. Like, it seems like under your definition, literally every single thing ever is a biological impulse, which then I can absurdly reduce to every single thing is just the result of physics. So everything is physics. But like when you say everything is one thing, there's no point in calling it anything. Does that make sense? Like if everything is biological impulse, then nothing is biological impulse. Like why even call something biological impulse if there's no distinction between any other thing? We would just assume, okay, well, everything is biological impulse. Now let's actually have a conversation that matters, right? So we can talk about things like social contract or something like that. Because according to you, it sounds like you're saying that every single thing is biological impulse. So like, why even bother bringing it up?
Because you're asking me why there would be a position of morality that would excuse certain things but not excuse others. And then to add on, there's the social aspect.
Well, so not biological. Like if everything is biological impulse, why would two different societies have different systems of morals? We all have the same biology.
Yes, and through different ways of teaching.
Why do we teach in different ways if we have the same biology?
Because there's geographical changes.
So things that aren't biological
resource
impulse.
changes. That is a biological impulse. If you're more likely to survive through different teaching, then that is not necessarily it's somewhat natural selection. It's like it goes back to, are you smarter? People enjoyed smarter people, even if we're going to look at a societal stance. So that person's more likely to have a group of people, which means they're more likely to be happy, which means they're more likely to survive. Even if we're going to look at this in a way that is outside of resources. Because a resource isn't necessarily just food and water. Okay? It's land, it's your political clout with other people.
Sure. Okay, listen, I love you, but I really have to do a thing. I'm like 20 minutes late.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Do you want to wrap up give me your final thoughts?
So, I personally, I just wanted to talk to you, to be honest.
All right. Well, hey, I appreciate the conversation, buddy. Stay safe. Be careful.
Yeah, you too. Don't let your morals flow away like the wind.
Okay. Ugh. Okay.